There are places on this earth where the silence is so complete, so ancient, that it feels like the land itself is holding its breath. The Yakama Nation Reservation in south-central Washington state is one of those places. Stretching across more than 1 million acres of high desert, volcanic plains, and sacred mountain wilderness, this land has belonged to the Yakama people for thousands of years, long before any border was drawn on any map, long before any courthouse was built in any city. This land remembers everything. And in the fall of 2018, this land bore witness to something it should never have had to witness. It began, as so many tragedies do, with a disappearance. A woman, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a community member. She simply stopped being present. No goodbye, no warning, no trace. One day she was here, laughing and breathing and living, and then she was not. Her name was Rosenda Sophia Strong. She was 31 years old. She was a member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and a proud descendant of the Yakama Nation. She had 4 children who needed her. She had a sister who adored her. She had a community that knew her name. And in early October of 2018, she vanished. Weeks after Rosenda disappeared, a second woman went missing. Jedidah Aisha Moreno, 30 years old, a mother, a daughter, a woman with a complicated story, a woman who had made terrible choices, but a woman nonetheless, whose life would end violently, whose body would be discarded, whose disappearance would go unanswered for weeks. 2 women, 2 families shattered, 2 communities left screaming into a void that too often returns only silence. In the years that followed, this case would grow into something far larger and far darker than anyone initially understood. What investigators would uncover was not simply a murder. It was a conspiracy, a web of betrayal woven by people the victims had called friends, a network of silence maintained by fear, self-preservation, and a breathtaking disregard for human life. At the center of it all was a house that people in the community called, with a kind of grim poetry, the House of Souls. And within the walls of that house, on a cool October night in 2018, the lives of Rosenda Strong and Jedidah Moreno were irrevocably altered, setting in motion a chain of events that would take years to unravel, 7 people to face federal justice, and a grieving sister's unwavering advocacy to finally bring into the light. On March 30th, 2026, more than 7 years after Rosenda Strong was reported missing, the final chapter of this case was written in a federal courtroom in Yakama, Washington. The last defendant stood before a judge. The last sentence was handed down, and a family that had waited and waited and refused to stop waiting finally exhaled. She had been out there for 275 days. The victims. Before we talk about what happened to Rosenda Strong, we need to talk about who Rosenda Strong was. Because the greatest disservice we can do to victims of violent crime is to define them entirely by the manner of their death, to reduce a full, complex, vibrant human life to a case number and a set of forensic findings. Rosenda Strong was not a case. She was a person, and she deserves to be remembered that way. Rosenda Sophia Strong was born into 2 nations, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and the Yakama Nation. That dual heritage was not merely a legal designation, it was the foundation of her identity, the cultural bedrock upon which her sense of self was built. She grew up knowing the stories of her people, knowing the land, knowing that she belonged to a community with a history that stretched back far beyond the written record, a history carried in ceremony and language and song. She was 31 years old when she disappeared. She had 4 children. 4 children who woke up one morning and found that their mother was gone, and who would spend years wondering why. People who knew Rosenda describe her the way people always describe those they love and have lost, with that particular mixture of grief and gratitude, where every memory becomes simultaneously a gift and a wound. She was spirited. She had a laugh that filled whatever room she was in. She had opinions, and she shared them. She was the kind of person who, when she walked into a gathering, the energy of the room shifted, not because she demanded attention, but because warmth, when it is genuine, tends to radiate. In late September of 2018, Rosenda Strong accepted a ride. That is all it was, at first. A ride. The kind of unremarkable mundane act that millions of people perform every day without consequence. She accepted a ride with people she knew, people she considered, in some capacity, part of her social world. They were heading to Legends Casino, in Toppenish, a casino, a public place, the kind of destination that feels safe by virtue of its ordinariness. She never came home. Now, Jedidah Moreno. Her story is the most complicated element of this entire case, and we must approach it with honesty and care. Jedidah Moreno was 30 years old. She was from Yakama, Washington. She was, according to court documents and the findings of federal investigators, the person who shot and killed Rosenda Strong on October 5, 2018. That is a fact. It is established. It will not be disputed here. But Jedidah Moreno was also a victim. Not of Rosenda Strong. Rosenda was innocent of any wrongdoing, but Jedidah Moreno was, within days of killing Rosenda, herself murdered, bound, gagged, forced into the trunk of a car, shot multiple times, her body dumped in a remote area of the Yakama Nation and left to be discovered by a stranger. She was a human being. She made a catastrophic, unforgivable choice, and then she was killed for it. Not by the justice system, not after any process of law, but by people who had decided they held the power of life and death over her. 2 women, both dead, both left in the landscape of the Yakama Nation, both their families without answers. What ties them together is not just their shared fate, but the place where their stories intersected. The House of Souls, 1161 Donald Road outside Wapato, Washington. On October 5, 2018, Rosenda Strong and Jedidah Moreno were both there, and only one of them walked out alive. Part 3. The Disappearance and Investigation. The investigation into the disappearance of Rosenda Strong began, as so many investigations into missing Indigenous women begin, without the urgency it deserved. This is not a careless accusation. Many of the law enforcement officers who worked this case were dedicated, diligent professionals who cared deeply about finding answers. But it is an honest reckoning with a systemic reality that has been documented, quantified, and mourned by Indigenous communities across the United States for decades. When Indigenous women go missing, the machinery of justice moves slowly. Sometimes it does not move at all. The Yakama Nation Tribal Police received the report of Rosenda Strong's disappearance in early October 2018. Around the same time, her family began making noise, calling, asking, demanding to know what was being done. Her sister, Sissy Strong Reyes, would become over the following years one of the most determined advocates for justice that this case, or perhaps any case in this region, had ever seen. She attended nearly every court hearing. She spoke publicly. She refused, at every juncture, to allow the system to forget that her sister's name was Rosenda, that she had existed, that she mattered. But in those early weeks of October 2018, Sissy was simply a sister, scared, searching, calling anyone who might know anything. Rosenda Strong had disappeared in late September 2018 after getting a ride with acquaintances to nearby Legends Casino in Toppenish. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. After that, nothing. No activity on any accounts, no sightings, no communication with her children or her family. She was simply gone. Then in October 2018, a second family walked into the unknown. Jedidah Moreno was also reported missing. Now there were 2 missing persons cases in the same geographic area, overlapping in time, sharing certain social connections. For investigators paying attention, it was a signal. though the shape of what had actually happened was still entirely hidden from view. November came. The mornings grew colder, the days shorter. For the families of both women, each passing week was a compound injury. Every day without answers was another day of not knowing, and not knowing, in many ways, is worse than the worst truth. On November 28, 2018, the remains of Jedidah Moreno were discovered in a closed area of the Yakama Nation. A citizen came across them and immediately contacted law enforcement. She was identified through tattoos and dental records. The FBI investigated with assistance from Yakama Nation tribal police. The discovery confirmed the worst. Jedidah Moreno was dead, murdered. Court documents would later establish that she had been bound with a cargo strap and duct tape, forced into the trunk of a Chevrolet Impala, and shot multiple times with a .45 caliber pistol. Her body had then been transported to a remote location and abandoned. This was not a crime of passion. This was a deliberate, organized act of killing and concealment. The months that followed were months of grinding, painstaking investigative work, hundreds of interviews, search warrants executed across multiple locations, leads that materialized and then evaporated, witnesses who knew things but were afraid, genuinely afraid in some cases for their lives, to say them out loud. The social world that surrounded the House of Souls was one defined by drug use, by violence, by a culture of silence enforced through fear. Winter turned to spring. Spring turned to summer. Rosenda Strong was still missing. Then, on the 4th of July 2019, Independence Day in the United States, a holiday built around the concept of freedom, a homeless man made a discovery near a towing service a few miles west of Toppenish. An abandoned freezer. Strong's remains were found inside that freezer on the Yakama Nation reservation. They were only identified through dental records. Rosenda Strong had been out there for 275 days. 275 days in a freezer, while her children grew older without her, while her sister made calls and attended community meetings and refused to let her name be forgotten, while the world largely moved on. It was Sissy Strong Reyes who would later give language to this particular horror. Standing in a federal courtroom, addressing one of the men who had stayed silent, she said, "He had the power to bring justice and closure to my family, but chose to protect himself and those involved. If he would have reported what happened, my sister wouldn't have laid out there in a freezer for 275 days." The discovery of Rosenda's remains transformed the investigation. Now there were 2 confirmed homicides, 2 bodies, 2 families whose worst fears had been confirmed, and still, no arrests, no named suspects, no charges. The FBI's Indian Country Crime Unit worked the case. Federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of Washington reviewed evidence. Bit by bit, a statement here, a piece of forensic evidence there, a witness who finally decided that the weight of what they knew was heavier than the weight of the consequences of telling it. The picture assembled itself. The breakthrough was coming, but it would take nearly 5 years, and when it came, it would reveal depths of betrayal that no one was fully prepared for. Part 4. The Breakthrough and the Arrests. June 2023. Nearly 5 years after the deaths of Rosenda Strong and Jedidah Moreno. 5 years of investigation. 5 years of witnesses being interviewed and re-interviewed. 5 years of forensic evidence being analyzed and cross-referenced. 5 years of Sissy Strong Reyes showing up, refusing to let anyone forget. And then, on a morning in June of 2023, the Department of Justice made an announcement. 7 men had been indicted in federal court in connection with the deaths of Rosenda Strong and Jedidah Moreno. 7. Uriel Balanton Badillo, Andrew Norris Zach, Joshua Max Estrada, Michael Lee Moody, Wilson Lewis Hunt, Jamal Antoine Pims, Kevin Todd Brem. 7 men, 7 choices, 7 separate acts of commission or complicity that, woven together, constitute one of the most thoroughly documented cases of violent conspiracy and criminal concealment in the recent history of the Yakama nation. To understand how investigators got here, we must walk through what the evidence revealed, the sequence of events across those 2 fatal days in October 2018. October 5, 2018. According to court documents and evidence presented at sentencing, Jedidah Moreno shot and killed Rosenda Strong on or about October 5, 2018, following an argument at a residence known as the House of Souls in Wapato, Washington. The argument ended with Moreno drawing a weapon and pulling the trigger. Strong died there, in the dirt of a neglected backyard, surrounded by the detritus of a property in permanent disrepair. She was 31 years old. She had 4 children at home. She had gone out that night not knowing it would be her last. Now the conspiracy began. Following the murder, Moreno asked for help disposing of Strong's body. Andrew, Norris, Zach, and Jamal Pims rolled her body into a freezer. The freezer and other appliances were loaded onto the back of a truck. The body, still inside the freezer, was then dumped near M&R Towing off Highway 97 in Toppenish, Washington. And Wilson Louis Hunt showed others where to leave it. These were not strangers to Rosenda Strong. These were people from her social world, people she had been around, people who, in the moments after her death, made a collective decision that their own safety and freedom mattered more than her dignity, more than her family's right to know, more than the basic human obligation to acknowledge that a person had died. October 6, 2018. The morning after Rosenda Strong's murder, Jedidah Moreno was still alive. She had committed a killing the previous day. She had enlisted the help of the people around her to conceal it, and she was, by every account available, volatile, dangerous, unraveling. Moreno and Andrew Norris Zach got into an argument at a residence known as the Estrada Ranch in Wapato, Washington. Moreno took out a gun and fired multiple gunshots into a garage where Zach was in the bathroom. One of these shots struck Zach's hand. The violence was spreading. The social world around the House of Souls was eating itself alive. Around the same time that Zach was shot, Uriel Balentin Badillo was at Legends Casino. He received a call that Zach was in trouble. He drove out to the residence. He found Moreno standing in a field. What happened next was not a spontaneous act of anger. It was organized. It was deliberate. It was, in the cold language of federal statute, a kidnapping resulting in death. Badillo drove Moreno to the House of Souls, where Rosenda Strong had been killed the day before, to look for Zach. When they arrived, a female came out of the house and said, "Gag the bitch up." After a sock was placed into Moreno's mouth, Badillo and the female drove Moreno back to the Estrada Ranch. There, Moreno was physically restrained, bound with a cargo strap and duct tape, forced into a Chevrolet Impala, and then Badillo stood over that trunk and fired a .45 caliber pistol into it, multiple times. Read that again slowly. A sock placed in a woman's mouth, her hands bound with a cargo strap and duct tape, forced into the trunk of a car, and then a man standing over that trunk, firing a pistol into it, multiple times. Jedidah Moreno was a killer. That is a fact. But what was done to her was also a killing. There was no trial, no process, no authority, just the brutal, terrifying logic of a world in which violence solves problems by creating new ones. Later that day, 2 juveniles transported Moreno's body to another location on the Yakama Nation. One of those juveniles then fired additional rounds into Moreno's body. The next day, Joshua Estrada spoke to Badillo, Zach, and the juvenile. When Estrada learned that Badillo had murdered Moreno and that her body had been dumped in a non-discreet location, Estrada worked to help move it, and then handed Badillo the cargo strap so that Badillo could destroy the evidence. Evidence destruction, a conscious act, a choice made with full knowledge of what had occurred to ensure that it remained hidden. The car, with several bullet holes in the trunk, was found submerged in Charlie's Pond on Ford Road on January 5, 2019. but authorities didn't know who had concealed it there until June 2023. That car sat at the bottom of that pond for more than 4 years, holding its secrets, waiting. What finally broke the case open was what ultimately breaks most conspiracies open: people talking. Not one person, not one dramatic confession, but a gradual erosion of silence, witness after witness, some motivated by conscience, some by the pressure of their own legal jeopardy, some simply because carrying knowledge of 2 murders for years is a weight that, eventually, becomes too heavy. And in June of 2023 the indictments came down. 7 men, federal charges, and the machinery of justice, having moved slowly for nearly 5 years, accelerated into the final phase. Part 5. The Dark Conspiracy. 7 men. 7 choices. 7 separate acts of complicity that together constitute a conspiracy of silence so deep, so deliberate, that it kept a family in agony for years. Let us name them. Let us account for each one. First, Uriel Valentin Badillo, 41 years old. He received the harshest sentence in this case: 292 months in federal prison, nearly 24 years, for kidnapping resulting in death. Badillo is the man who made the phone call from Legends Casino into a death sentence, who drove out, found Moreno standing in a field, and made a calculation, who drove her to the House of Souls, who had her gagged, who bound her, who forced her into a trunk, and who then fired a .45 caliber pistol into that trunk, multiple times. This was not heat-of-the-moment violence. At every junction this man had the opportunity to stop, and at every junction he chose to continue. Second, Joshua Max Estrada, 27 years old, 100 months in federal prison, just over 8 years, accessory after the fact. Estrada did not kill Rosenda Strong. He did not kill Jedidah Moreno, but he knew both things had happened. He spoke to Badillo and Zach after Moreno's murder. He helped ensure her body was moved. He took the cargo strap, the physical instrument of Moreno's restraint, and handed it back to Badillo to be destroyed. And he stayed silent, for years. In court, his legs were shackled as he walked slowly to the podium. He said, "I apologize for what happened. My heart goes out to Rosenda. I'm sorry it happened. I was friends with her." Friends. That word lands with terrible weight. These were not strangers to each other, and that made the betrayal not just a crime, but a violation of something that should have meant something. Third, Michael Lee Moody, 44 years old, 87 months in federal prison, more than 7 years accessory after the fact. Moody was part of the network that wrapped Rosenda Strong, moved her, and left her in a freezer off a highway. His sentence reflects his position in the chain of command, not the triggerman, not the kidnapper, but complicit in the concealment that extended Strong's family's agony by nearly 9 months. Fourth, Wilson Louis Hunt, 46 years old, 84 months in federal prison, 7 years, accessory after the fact. Hunt showed others where to leave the freezer containing Rosenda Strong's body. His defense attorney noted accurately that his client did not kill Rosenda Strong, did not plan anything, did not fire a weapon, but Chief Judge Bastian was clear-eyed. Hunt had the power to bring justice and closure to the family, and he chose to protect himself and those involved. Because of his silence, Rosenda's family spent 9 more months not knowing where she was. 9 months of her children waking up without an answer. He told the judge, "I'm sorry for what happened. I apologize to the family." Fifth, Andrew Norris Zach, 43 years old, 43 months in federal prison, accessory after the fact and felon in possession of a firearm. Zach was present at both crime scenes. He helped roll Rosenda's body into the freezer at the House of Souls. He was shot in the hand by Moreno at the Estrada Ranch the next day. He was, in a sense, both a participant in concealment and a victim of the violence cascading outward from Moreno's increasingly dangerous state. And yet, for years, he stayed silent. Sixth, Jamal Antoine Pims, 44 years old, 26 months in federal prison, the shortest sentence among the 7 misprision of felony. Pims walked into the backyard of the House of Souls and was one of the first to see Rosenda Strong's body after the shooting. He then helped roll that body into a freezer. He knew, he saw, he participated, and when the FBI came knocking in 2019, he said nothing. The U.S. Attorney stated at his sentencing, Jamal Pims had the opportunity, and even the obligation to come forward with the truth about Rosenda Strong's death when the FBI interviewed him in 2019. Instead, Mr. Pims chose silence, compounding the harm to the family and delaying justice for years. His failure to speak denied a grieving family and community the answers they deserved and allowed uncertainty and anguish to linger far too long. 7th, Kevin Todd Brem. 70 months in federal prison, accessory after the fact, the final defendant. The last sentence, sentenced on March 30, 2026. What is the through line that connects these 7 men? It is not hatred. It is not ideology. It is something more banal, and in many ways more terrifying. It is the logic of self-preservation, operating within a community already defined by fear and marginalization. Each of these men, at the moment of their choice, made a calculation. They weighed what they knew against what they risked by speaking, and they chose silence. But silence has a cost, and in this case, the FBI refused to let that cost go unpaid. Special Agent in Charge W. Mike Harrington of the FBI Seattle Field Office said, "More than 7 years after this senseless murder, another defendant is being sentenced for helping to conceal the crime. The FBI and our partners are committed to combating violent crime on tribal lands throughout the entire state of Washington, and we are dedicated to pursuing justice for victims and their grieving families and communities, no matter how long it takes." No matter how long it takes. Those 5 words, that is the answer to every conspiracy. That is the answer to every man who thought time was on his side. Part 6. The 2026 Courtroom and the Final Sentencing. Morning, March 30th, 2026. The William O. Douglas Federal Courthouse in Yakama, Washington. Early spring in the Pacific Northwest. That particular shade of gray-white sky that carries with it the memory of winter and the tentative promise of something warmer ahead. A small group of people stands outside the courthouse. Sissy Strong Reyes is among them. She is wearing red. 7 years, 5 months, and 28 days. That is how long it had been since Rosenda Strong was last seen alive. And on the morning of March 30th, 2026, Sissy Strong Reyes walked through the doors of a federal courthouse for what she knew, finally, would be the last time, the last sentencing, the final defendant, the closing of a legal chapter that had consumed nearly a decade of her life. Inside the courtroom, the gallery fills. Family members, advocates, law enforcement officials, journalists. The energy in the room is not celebratory. It is something more complicated, the gravity of accumulated grief meeting the formal architecture of justice. Kevin Todd Brem. The last of 7 men to stand before Chief Judge Stanley Abastian. But before the sentence was read, before the final gavel fell, there was a moment that belongs entirely to Sissy Strong Reyes. Over the course of this case, across sentencing after sentencing, hearing after hearing, Sissy had stood at podiums in that courthouse and found language for the unlanguageable. She had spoken about what it meant to have a sister who was gone. She had spoken about 275 days of not knowing. When Joshua Estrada stood before the court, she reminded the room what friendship should have meant. She said, "He had the power to bring justice and closure to my family, but chose to protect himself and those involved. If he would have reported what happened, my sister wouldn't have laid out there in a freezer for 275 days." When Wilson Lewis Hunt, who had spent months trying to delay his trial, finally stood before the court, she looked at him and said, "I just wanted the truth, and you could have given it to me, if you were her friends." If you were her friends. 7 men, 7 people from Rosenda's social world, 7 people who sat with the truth and chose silence, and 1 woman, 1 sister, who sat with the not knowing and chose to keep fighting. Chief Judge Stanley A. Bastian had spoken powerful words throughout this case. At the sentencing of Wilson Lewis Hunt, he had said, "This mystery, this cover-up, destroyed family relationships. The impact of what happened here will echo for many years to come." And on March 30th, 2026, as the last defendant stood before him, Bastian delivered the final sentence. Kevin Todd Brem, 70 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release to follow. The complete accounting of justice in the House of Souls case now stood as follows. Uriel Valentin Badillo, 292 months, nearly 24 years for kidnapping resulting in death. Michael Lee Moody, 87 months, 7 years and 3 months, accessory after the fact. Joshua Max Estrada, 100 months, 8 years and 4 months, accessory after the fact. Wilson Lewis Hunt, 84 months, 7 years, accessory after the fact. Kevin Todd Brem, 70 months, 5 years and 10 months, accessory after the fact. Andrew Norris Zach, 43 months, 3 years and 7 months, accessory after the fact and felon in possession of a firearm. Yamo Antoine Pims, 26 months, 2 years and 2 months, misprision of felony. 7 defendants, all convicted, all sentenced, all pleaded guilty. After the last gavel fell, Sissy walked outside. She stood with her brother Christopher, her cousin Sammy Strong, advocates, family members, people who had come to witness the end of a chapter they had all lived inside of for years. The first Assistant United States Attorney, Pete Serrano, spoke at a press conference. He said, "This wasn't something that was just a small piece of work. You're talking about binders and compact discs full of information, interviews, flying folks back and forth from Washington, D.C. to conduct interviews. It was no small task." Yakama County Sheriff Bob Udall said, "It's a big day because we didn't just resolve a homicide. We resolved a crime not just against Rosenda and Sissy and her family, but a crime against the community." Detective Todd Beebe of the Yakama Nation Tribal Police said, "I know how long this has been for her family. This has been a long journey. Today, we can start the healing." And then Sissy Strong Reyes spoke. She said, "It's been a long journey. It's been a long road for us to be in the courts with 7 subjects that were involved in my sister Rosenda's case. Today, I feel like it's a victory for us in a way, because we got truth and accountability. For me and my family, it means justice, accountability, truth, and victory. Because too many families don't get to see their loved one's case in the court system." 4 words, each one earned, each one the product of 7 years of refusing to be silent. And then she said the thing that will outlast every sentence, every press conference, every legal proceeding in this long and painful story. Her message: to every family currently living in the same waiting, the same not knowing, the same daily fight to keep a name alive. She said, "Don't give up. Keep fighting. Keep your loved one visible. Keep saying their name, because law enforcement is listening. Keep saying their name." Part 7. The Aftermath and the Legacy. Rosenda Strong's case is closed. 8 years, 7 convictions, federal sentences totaling more than 700 months of combined prison time, a family that fought every single day for nearly a decade and refused to let the system forget. By any measure, this is a story of justice delivered. But justice delivered is not the same as justice systemic, and to close this story without naming the larger context would be to honor Rosenda's memory only partially, which is to say, not fully enough. Murder is the 3rd leading cause of death for American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls. American Indian and Alaska Native women experience a murder rate 10 times higher than the national average. More than 4 in 5, 84.3%, have experienced violence in their lifetime. These are not abstract numbers. These are women, each one with a name, a family, a community, each one deserving the same relentless pursuit of justice that Sissy Strong Reyes fought for on behalf of her sister. Washington State has the second highest number of missing and murdered indigenous women and girls in the entire nation, and the Yakama Reservation alone has at least 40 documented missing persons cases, including the oldest reported cold case in Washington State, a 16-year-old girl who disappeared in 1971 and has never been found. 50 years of silence. 50 years of a family waiting. The Rosenda Strong case exists within this landscape. It is the exception that should become the rule. The case that proves what is possible when law enforcement refuses to give up, when a community refuses to look away, and when one woman refuses to stop saying her sister's name. Sissy Strong Reyes understood this from the beginning. Even in the depths of her own grief, she never framed her advocacy as being only for Rosenda. The legal chapter of Rosenda Strong's case has concluded, but the family's mission to advocate for missing and murdered indigenous people continues, ensuring that Rosenda's legacy extends beyond the courtroom to help other families seeking justice. That is the legacy. Not the sentences, though the sentences matter. Not the convictions, though the convictions matter. But the model. A family that refused to be silent. An advocate who showed up every hearing, every delay, every setback, and said she existed. She mattered. Her name was Rosenda. Rosenda Sophia Strong was a mother of 4, a member of the Yakama Nation, a daughter of the Umatilla people, a woman who laughed and loved and lived, and who was taken, violently and without justice, on the 5th day of October in 2018. She waited 275 days to be found. She waited nearly 8 years to be fully avenged. Her sister never stopped saying her name. And so we say it here, at the end of the story, as it should be said at the end of every story like this one, not as a conclusion, but as a continuation. Rosenda. Rosenda Strong. She was here. In memory of Rosenda Sophia Strong, 1987 to 2018. And Jedidah, Isha Moreno, 1988 to 2018. May 5th is the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Relatives. If you have information about a missing or murdered Indigenous person, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or your local tribal police department. To the family still waiting, keep saying their names. Rosenda Strong waited 275 days to be found. Don't let her story wait any longer. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell because justice deserves to be heard.